Howdy. Welcome to the Breakaway Summer Podcast. We are excited that you are following along with us. Thanks for listening and enjoy the talk.
Well, several years ago, a man by the name of Steve Callahan, after a terrible boating accident, was lost at sea for 2.5 months somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean by himself in a little rubber life raft. And he began to starve to death, became dazed, emaciated, and yet in the middle of that crisis, he was able to take 3 pencils and lash them together and create a sextant, which is a navigational tool that can help you figure out where you are by measuring the distance between the sun and the horizon. And it was based on his understanding of these fixed realities in the universe that Steve was able to determine what latitudinal line he was on the globe. And from there, he was able to paddle into the correct stream that led him safely to the Caribbean, thereby having a great vacation, I would presume, because they have wonderful beaches there, right? Now, why tell you that? For this reason. It was his understanding of these fixed realities in the universe that allowed him to navigate his life well. And I tell you that because what I want to look at tonight is 2 fixed realities in the universe that if we can get our mind on, it will help us navigate life well. I want to show us 2 realities around which all of the universe and the Bible and your history rotates. And if we can get our mind around these, we're going to navigate life well. And reality number 1 is this: though we were made by God and made for God, though everyone in here was made to know God and enjoy God and run with God, that there is a tendency in us to resist the leadership of God. Reality 1 is that there's a tendency in all of us to resist the leadership of God, and not just resist it, but to run from Him, which doesn't make any sense. That we pursue life by running away from the author of life. But we do it. Do you know what we're like? We're like me when I used to go to summer camp. When I was a kid, we would go to summer camp, and it wasn't near as awesome as this camp now. We didn't have all the stuff that you're going to have this week, like rec options and friendship. We would be out in these kind of like little colleges in the backwoods of Mississippi, and we would just kind of walk around and look at the buildings. But there was only one highlight we had every summer at camp, and that was the Sadie Hawkins race. Which, if you're not familiar with what that was, basically how it would work is this. All the guys, they would line us up at the edge of a field, and then they would blow a whistle, and all the boys would run out into the field. And then they would blow the whistle again, and all the girls had to run out into the field and chase their boy of choice and tag them and then take them to dinner that night. Which, in retrospect, I think was kind of stressful for the girls. I don't know. I never thought about it at the time. But it was also stressful for the guys because you could land in that horrible moment where you're running and then you look and no one's chasing you, right? Which happened, but I'm married now, so I'm fine. But I'll never forget my 8th grade year. I received reliable intel that one of the coolest girls in our youth group was going to chase me, senior in high school. Now, it was a mercy thing, and I knew that. But she was awesome, and so I was okay with it, right? Now, gentlemen, help me with this. If you know that this super cute, amazing girl is going to chase you, what do you do when you're out in that field? Yeah, you limp, fall, or something in front of her and be like, oh, Charlie horse, right? And everybody wins, right? And yet I don't know what was happening in my little 8th grade mind. As soon as the whistle blew, I just took off running. And not only did I run as she caught up to me, I began to dodge and juke until finally she had to clothesline me in the neck to get me to stop. And then we went to dinner that night and had a lovely time. Now, why tell you that? For this reason. It was my insanity to run from her. And it was her kindness to chase me. And that's your second reality. Reality 1 is this, that there's a tendency in all of us, as crazy as it is, to run from intimacy with God. And yet the good news is, reality 2 is this, there is a tendency in God to chase us and to intersect our self destructive behavior. Our tendency to run, the Bible calls sin. His tendency to chase and to grab us and to lead us where we're meant to be is called grace. And that's the story of your Bible. That's the story of human history. Sin and grace, running and chasing. And that's the story of the book of Jonah. And so as we look at the book of Jonah tonight in chapter 1, let me just let you see where it's going. There's 4 pieces. God's going to call. Jonah's going to run. God's going to pursue. And Jonah's going to surrender. So you see God call in verses 1 and 2. He calls Jonah to run with him. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Now, by way of introduction, Jonah is a prophet. He's someone who knows God, walks with God, has spoken the words of God to the people of God. And yet in this moment, God says, Jonah, I got an assignment for you. I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to cry out to them. Now, in Jonah's defense, that's a pretty crazy thing to say. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Assyria was the neighboring nation. It's in modern-day Iraq, and it was no safer back then than Iraq is today. And they were the neighbor to Jonah's Jewish people, and they were not a fan of Jews, and Jews weren't a fan of them. It was a dangerous place to send Jonah. It would be like if God sent you to Baghdad. If he said, arise and go and preach to ISIS. You'd be maybe a little stressed. And yet the reality is amazing always starts with daring. And God says, Jonah, I want you to run with me. I'm going to Nineveh. Ride with me. Be a part of something amazing with me, Jonah. Jump into the story of God. Be a part of something bigger than just yourself, Jonah. Come ride with me. And yet you see Jonah's response in verse 3. It says, but Jonah arose and fled to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Now there's a lot of humor in the book of Jonah. You just need to know that. And a lot of Hebrew humor is play on words. And you get your first one right here where it has the similar language. God says, arise and go. And it says, Jonah arose and fled. That's how the first couple of verses reads. It's like God says, Jonah, arise and go. And Jonah goes, yes, God, wait, what is that? And takes off, right? And goes the other way. And it's interesting, if you look at a map, and I think we've got one, you can get a sense of what's happening here. This is where Jonah is when God calls him. And he calls him to go to Nineveh, which is here. And Jonah takes off to Tarshish, which is here. So there's not some confusion. There's not like, oh, I thought you said Nashville. What am I doing in this boat? I'm so sorry. God called him this way. And Jonah says, I hear you. I'm going this way. And if you think the text reads a little funny the way it does it, it's actually sort of a poem in Hebrew that the way they lay it out, it's called a chiasm, which I won't get into all that, but the way it kind of lays out is it has some repetition in it, that it starts with I'm going to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and it ends with going to Tarshish away from the presence of the Lord. To Tarshish from the Lord, to Tarshish from the Lord. Down to Joppa, down to the ship, found that ship, paid its fare, I'm going to Tarshish, dead center. That I understand what God is asking of me. I understand what the maker of the stars wants from my life. I heard him, but I'm going this way. I'm going this way from the presence of the Lord. Now here's something I want us all to catch tonight. We all do this. We all do this. Humanity has done this. You see it at the very beginning of our Bible. God fashions us to know him, to enjoy him, to walk with him. And at the very beginning, everything good is given to us by God. Anything that was not from God, there isn't anything. It's all from him and beautiful. Any temptation to move away from God is based on a lie and a distortion. And that's what comes to our first parents. The lie that to really enjoy life, you have to run from the author of life. And it's a lie we still believe. How many times have you heard your friends say, or maybe you've said it, as someone's talked to you about spiritual things, you say, yeah, I know I should care about all that God stuff, but I want to have fun first. What's the assumption there? That a real, enjoyable, qualitative life requires distancing from God. That's a lie. That's a lie from the very beginning. And our first parents believed that. And the Bible says when they moved from God, their foolish hearts went dark. Something broke in us. It says the ground's cursed because of you. Nothing around here is going to work anymore, and our distancing from God dislodged us from everything, and relationships have broken down, nature has broken down, and everything from psychos who march into churches with guns to the weird, insecure things you said on the bus right here to get attention. It comes from this. There's something wrong with us. I remember sitting with some young women once, very successful women from London. Not religious ladies, but we hit it off. We became friends. My wife and I were visiting with them. And after about an hour of a conversation, they found out I was a minister, which is usually a conversation stopper, right? And yet we had developed this basis of friendship. And so they said, I told them I teach the Bible. And they were like, really? And one of them was like, can I just tell you I've never touched a Bible, never read one in my life? And I said, yeah, okay, you can tell me that. And she said, okay, I have a question. Why do religious people kill people? And I love that she felt safe enough to ask me that. Why do religious people kill people? Because they lived in London and someone had just bombed the London subway. And I told them, well, I haven't killed anybody. And I said, but let me tell you something. Any philosophy can be twisted and turned violent. Christianity, Buddhism, you even have like Buddhist and Hindu terrorists. Do you know that? If anyone should be cooled out, it's like the Hindus. You got Hindu terrorists. Atheism, look at the history of any philosophy. It can be twisted and turned violent. I said the problem is often not in the philosophies, it's in us. There's something wrong with us. And you know what's interesting? They didn't debate that at all. These completely unreligious girls went, yeah. And one of them was like, I don't even understand what I do. Like, I'll know what I want to do and I'm supposed to do, and I don't do it. And she didn't even know she was quoting Romans. She was like, I see beauty and I don't do it. There's something broken in us. We violate our own morality. There's something wrong with us. And we all know it. Humanity's gone astray, and individually we've gone astray. It's interesting, the Infant Cognition Center at Yale, they were studying babies. And they discerned, and I won't tell you about the whole study, you can look it up online, Yale Infant Cognition Center did it. They realized there's morality in babies before they're ever taught it. That little babies at birth know the difference between right and wrong. And they did this elaborate puppet show thing where some puppets would do good things like share and care for people. Other puppets would do bad things like steal and hit. And these little babies, pre-verbal, hadn't said a thing. They said it wasn't just like statistically it leaned a little towards they preferred the good ones. It said it was like 97% didn't just like the good puppets and dislike the bad ones. It says when they saw the good puppet that shared and was kind, they would smile, they would laugh, they would hug it. That when they saw the bad puppet that stole from people and was mean to people, they would frown, they would cry, they would hit it. They said little babies, pre-verbal, just new in the world, saw what was moral and good as beautiful, and saw what was selfish and rude as ugly, and not only ugly, but should be judged. And then they asked the question, so if we all know what's moral and beautiful, why do we all end up doing what is ugly? And at Yale, they said, I don't know. Weird. But we know. We know God has put in us a sense of what's beautiful. Love and kindness are beautiful. That's from God, and it's meant to be ours as we are united with Him. But every single one of us violates our own morality. We're all dirty, and we know it. The best self-knowledge you can have tonight is how do you do it? We know how Jonah did. Went down to Joppa, found a boat, paid the fare, got into it, going to Tarshish. His was a very physical running from God. Everybody runs. Jonah did it through Joppa. Some of the best knowledge you can have of yourself is how do you run? The Apostle Paul knew how he did it. He said, I covet. He said, there's other things that don't bother me. There's other sins that people struggle with I don't struggle with. But he said, but when it came to coveting, he said, it got me, man. He said, because in my heart, when I see someone have what I want, I really dislike that person. And some of you, that's your thing. Some of you, that's your thing this week. You like being the funny guy. It's your favorite thing in the group. You tell the joke, everybody laughs, and what happens? If someone else enters the circle, some new kid, and suddenly he's real funny, what happens? You're like, I hate that guy. He's got to leave. No, he lacks character. I despise him, right? And you got to cut him down. Some of you girls feel that. Maybe you're used to being the pretty one, the cute one, and some other girl comes in and everyone's admiring her outfit. Oh, you look so cute. And what happens in some of your hearts? You're like, you two look adorable, and now you should be hit by a bus or something. What? I didn't what? Oh, no. Right? We can't celebrate it. We hate seeing some other people rise up. Some of us, it's coveting, like Paul. Some of us, like Elijah, when he got real with God, Elijah said, you know what it is for me? He said, it's my mouth. He said, it's the way I talk. It's the way I joke. The way I say hurtful things to rip people down, gossip. It's the way I use my mouth. Some of you, it's lust. That's your poison. You go, I know how God said to enjoy sexuality. Sex was his idea, and it's a great idea. And you say, I know he said to enjoy it within certain parameters. I heard him clearly. I know God said that. And you know what? I don't care. I'm going to take sexuality and use it this way. And some of you have gone down some sad, broken places because you've decided to take sex and distort it and run. What gets you? Some of you, it's unforgiveness. Some of you, if I can just be honest, your parents were not great parents. And that hurt. But you've decided in that hurt to hold on to bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness because that makes you feel strong and makes you feel powerful. And that leads to some very dark places. Some of you, it's insecurity. You beat yourself up. If we read your journal, it'd be filled with self-loathing. Some of you, that's how you do it. Though you're made in the image of God, you trash yourself like you're something far less. All of us run. The best knowledge you can have tonight is knowing how do you do it. And let me tell you the sad thing. There'll always be a boat to take you there. There's always a boat going to Tarshish. You want to run away from God by diving into illicit sex? There's always going to be some new image to click on, some new person to take advantage of. There's always a boat to that. You want to hold on to bitterness? There will always be someone to resent. Always. You want to compare and analyze yourself to death? There will always be fuel for your self-consciousness. There's always a boat to Tarshish, and everybody runs. The best thing you can know tonight is how do you do it? How do you do it? Question. If you're God who made us, and you see us do this, what do? You watch something as beautiful as humanity do the ugly things we'll do to each other. What do? Does he let Jonah run? Does he say, fine, take off, you're a loser. I'll get a new prophet. Micah, get over here. Is that what he does? Is that what you would do? If you saw a little niece or nephew, little baby stumbling towards a busy street, what would you do? Psh, not my kid. Huh? No! You would run and you'd grab them. Even if the grabbing hurts, right? You would do it for their good. And God sees you and he sees me go astray, and God in his mercy will come for us, and he will come for Jonah, and the way he will often do it is by complicating things. By complicating things. Jonah, he comes with a storm. Verse 4, it says, the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea. There was a great storm on the sea, so the ship was about to break up. Sometimes in order to wake you up to your insanity, God will introduce into your life pain. Pain. So I remember going to a camp once when I was a youth pastor, and I was in the dorm, and like a dove got into the dorm. You know, and it probably flew in through a door and then realized I can't get out. And so it was trying to fly out through a window, and it just didn't understand, glass and sort of how that works. And so when I came in, I was watching this dove just beat its head against the glass and freaking out, basically, flapping everywhere and going to the bathroom all over itself and the windowsill. It was a very humiliating moment for the dove. And I was there for a buddy, and we were like, this is the saddest thing ever. Like, we have to help this little dove, And in my mind, I instantly got this image of me coming up to him and just being like, shh, shh, There, little buddy. I am here for you. I'm your rescuer and your healer. Go free and set him free. And for him to kind of turn around and thank me, a little tear in his eye, and tell his children about the great one who set him free. I just kind of had this picture of me and the dove having a moment. But what happened is these big, scary hands began to wrap themselves around a dove. He started losing it, scratching me, flinging his poo all over me. And I'm like, oh, I hate this dove, right? It just wasn't working. And so my buddy was watching our moment disintegrate, and he was like, time out. And he grabbed a big rug that was on the floor. And he picked up the rug, and he kind of curled it in a half circle and just went, punk, and pinned the dove against the window. And then he curled the rug around the dove towards a little cylinder. The dove's trapped in darkness. And all I could see is darkness and my buddy's face looking down at him. And he began to just slide him over to the door. And this dove is in full panic. This is not comfortable. But then at the right moment, he unfolds the rug, and this dove flies free. Flies where it wanted to be and didn't even know how to get there. And God in his mercy sometimes, as you and I pursue our crazy pursuits of life in the most broken places, to show you your problem, he'll introduce pain. He will bring a storm. And some of you, honestly, you're here. The reason you came here is because the way you're doing life and relationships and your body and your decisions, it's not working. God in his mercy is sending storms to you. What kind of storms does he send? Bunches. I'll tell you two of them. One of them is he might just not give you what you want. You want so desperately to get that group's attention or to get that person to love you or that person to notice you, and he's just not going to let you have it. And you're going to rage against him till you realize you're putting all this care and weight into something that can't hold the freight of your identity. Or others of you, and I think this is worse, he'll give you everything you want. And you'll stand there and you'll get that boyfriend, that girlfriend. You'll get that attention. You'll be at that party. You'll be invited into that circle. And you'll reach what you think is the pinnacle. And you'll realize that your soul still feels desperately empty. And that's a very scary place to be. And so God will send storms into the life of Jonah as a means of grace. And he'll do it with you. He will pursue you with a storm. And I love the way it reads, and to geek out about the language for a second, it literally says at one moment, and the ship was so serious that the boat considered breaking apart. I love that. God sends a storm serious enough that the way the original language reads is that the boat is like, this stinks, and we're not going to make it, right? The boat's freaking out. This is bad. The sailors start to freak out. They suddenly get religious. It says in verse 5, the sailors became afraid, cried to their God, threw the cargo from the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. They're all freaking out. Massive activity, throwing everything off the boat. We don't care about making money. We just want to live. And then in stark contrast, in the same verse, it says, but Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, had lain down and fallen sound asleep. Now, interesting question. How on earth is Jonah asleep in the middle of that? I'll tell you what I think it is. I think he's depressed. I think he's depressed. The book of Jonah is written as a poem. And if you notice in the repetition of the poem that keeps repeating in the word Jonah's life, down. Jonah went down to Joppa, down to the ship, down to the hold, laid down to go to sleep. Later he'll go down into the depths. That as Jonah runs from God, his life begins to spiral down, 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 down. And where we find Jonah in the middle of the storm is curled up in a self-conscious cocoon of victimization. That's Jonah. And what kills me is I see this all the time. And you know where I see it a lot is in my students. I was a youth pastor for years, and I left to go to seminary, and I remember I would run into my students again. And you know how I could tell how they were doing spiritually? I could tell in like less than a minute. Is by their vibrancy. I would see them if they were happy, if they were joyful, if they were happy to see me. You could tell probably as you looked at their life, they were growing with the Lord. And I'd see other ones that were depressed, jaded, wouldn't look me in the eye. And you realize that pursuing this vain path was leading them on a spiral down. And some of you, you're living there. Some of you, you're feeling that. It saps your energy, doesn't it? Carrying around the guilt of your secret addiction, it steals all your life, doesn't it? Some of you are a shell of the man or woman you're supposed to be because of the things you're doing in the dark. Some of you, the weight of comparison, it's absolutely an anchor to your soul. Some of you, the grudges that you're holding, the unwillingness to forgive, it's a weight around your neck. The weight of guilt and sin weighs us down. And here's the saddest thing about it. All the people who don't know God are what? They are desperately running around on the top of the ship trying to find answers to solve this calamitous situation. And the one guy with the answers is so wrapped up in his own problems, he won't help the people in need. And that's what's so frustrating to me about the Christian church sometimes. Is that I'll see Christians so wrapped up in their guilt and shame that they're so self-obsessed and curled inward, they're missing out on a world that is running around desperately in need of someone to speak to them the truth about a God who shows grace. And so how do we get out of the self-centered coma? Jonah surrenders. In verse 6, it's the captain that approaches him and says, "How is it that you're sleeping? Get up." He says, "Arise and call on your God." I love that he uses the same language. God said, "Arise and go." So Jonah arose and fled. And then the captain comes to him. He doesn't say, "Arise and try to crawl your way back to God to get in his good graces." That's not how we deal with God. He says, "Jonah, arise right where you are. Arise right in the depths of the ship. Arise right in the place of your guilt. Stand up, Jonah, and cry out to God. Don't try to fix it. Don't join in the cargo throwing. Jonah, get honest with God. What do we do when we realize we've run? Let me tell you what we do. We join Jonah in surrender. And the first way you do it is you face God. You get honest with him. And my hope is you don't wait till night 2 or 3 or 4 to have a big spiritual camp experience, but you'll just decide now, I need to get real with God and quit playing games. And Jonah gets a call to face God. Deal with God right where you are. Arise and look to him. Meanwhile, the sailors are trying to figure out what's going on. It says that they went to cast lots to see whose calamity they struck us. That was like a way of kind of like throwing dice or playing a little game to kind of figure out who it was. You know, it's like someone's causing this storm and you are it, Jonah. It's you. All right? And it's a little more complex than that, but just go with me. They figure out it's Jonah, right? And they get to the end of it and they look at Jonah and they start asking him these questions. Tell us. Why is this calamity striking us? What's your job? Where do you come from? Where's your country? From what people are you? They're asking him, Jonah, explain to us why things have gone so sideways. And what I love about Jonah is he doesn't make excuses. He doesn't say, I'm not in charge of the weather. I'm a victim just like you guys. Jonah decides to get honest. And he faces God as the first thing he does. And then he admits who he is. He says to them in verse 9, I'm a Hebrew. And I fear the Lord God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land. He said, I'm a Hebrew. The Old Testament name for God's chosen people. The people God came to when they were enslaved in Egypt and set them free. That's the name he uses. And he says, I'm one of God's people. One of the ones that were enslaved and God liberated and set free. I'm one of his people. And for some of you tonight, maybe you need to say, you know what? I'm a Christian. I put my faith in Jesus Christ. Maybe you did it as a kid and you go, I'm a Christian and I'm off on a boat somewhere I know I shouldn't be. And I just need to stand up and quit faking it and say, no, I belong to you, God. I do. I'm not acting like it. I'm out here in crazy town, but the reality is I really do belong to you. And I just need to acknowledge that I am yours and I believe in you. Others of you, you're in here and you're not a Christian. You're not. But you've been created. Somebody made this and it's not you. And someone made all of this and it's not you. You're a creation of God. And maybe that's the best place to start for you today is going, you know what? I've just been making up the rules as I go and life's not really working for me. I think there's someone bigger out there and you just need to stand up and face God and say, okay, I believe you made me and I'm up for listening to what it is that you're doing with my life. I want to be a part of something bigger than just me. And Jonah is honest and admits who he is. And we should too. And Jonah tells them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land. And I love it. In verse 10, it says, then the men became exceedingly frightened, and they said, how could you do this? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them, which is one of the funniest parts of this to me. You're like, when did that happen? Like when he was getting on the boat? So is this a business trip or pleasure? I'm fleeing from the Lord. So is that business? I don't know. Okay, yeah, sure, get on board, right? Like at some point he told them and they were like, fine, whatever. And then the storm comes and they get serious about it. And then he tells them, I love it. Not just I was fleeing the Lord, I'm fleeing the Lord, God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land, which I think is great about that. They go, wait a second. You're running from the God of the sea on a boat? On my boat? What's wrong with you? That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make sense for you to do it either. Some of you that are like, yeah, I'm a Christian. Last summer was amazing at camp, but you've just kind of veered off into crazy and you're like, whatever, I'm just kind of out here. I've seen so many non-believers come to Christians and go, what are you doing here? Why are you making decisions like that? That doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to run from a God who can see everything. You think he can't see you in the club? You think he can't see you? What's happening in your room? You think he can't see the decisions you're making or the way you're talking to that girl? The way you're treating that guy? You think he doesn't see that? It's crazy to act like you're running from God or he doesn't see you. It's crazy for Jonah. You think some angel lost him on the sonar? Some angel drops his headphones and goes, God, we've lost Jonah somewhere in Eastern Europe. I don't know where he went, right? No, God knows where Jonah is. And God knows where you are. He knows what you've done. He knows what you've said. He knows what your eyes have seen and your hands have touched. He's just waiting for you to be honest with him about it. And so Jonah surrenders, and we're meant to as well. We face God. I'm going to get real with you. We admit who I am. I belong to you. We confess what we've done. In verse 11, they say, what should we do to make the sea calm for us? And he says, throw me into it. For I know that it's on account of me that this storm has come upon you. He says, this is my fault. He says, we're all experiencing some damage here, and it's my fault. No excuses. I take ownership of that. We confess, we admit what we've done. Now, let me say that I am calling you to do this with God, and you may do it in this room. You may need to wait and go sit on the beach and get real with God sometime this week, but I want you to be honest with God about who you are and about the things you've done and get specific, not just generalities of, God, I'm struggling, right? Tell him how and why. And the reality is we're meant to be honest with God, just like Jonah, I keep wanting to call him Noah. Jonah is in this moment, but let me say something to you just to be clear. Jonah admits, I have done these things that are wrong and it has caused problems in my life. But let me just be clear, not every problem in your life is your fault. Your parents' divorce, not your fault. Not your fault. But my parents' divorce was not my fault. But my decision to hold on to unforgiveness and bitterness, that was my fault. And when I matured a bit, I had to own that. God, I'm choosing to hold on to anger, and that's not healthy, and it's not good, and it's hurt other people, and I'm in a place I don't want to be anymore, on a boat I was never meant to be on. And for some of you, you just need to get honest with God, not making big promises of what you're going to do, just admitting where you are and what you've done. Jonah admits it, and the last thing he does is he surrenders to God. He says, I have caused this storm, throw me into it. The men try not to. They try to get to land. They can't. They pray, God, have mercy on us. And then they pitch the guy into the sea, right? Now, here's the interesting thing about this. For some people, they read this and go, what, is this Jonah giving up? Like, well, God sent this storm, so just throw me in the ocean. I guess I'll drown, and I'm a victim, right? That's not what Jonah's doing. Jonah's saying, God is the God of the sea. Throw me to him. Jonah doesn't say, hand me a crate, let me start throwing out. Jonah doesn't come up with some big plan of how he's going to fix things. Jonah just says, throw me to him. Jonah surrenders. I got no plan. I got no excuses. I'm yours, God. And that's the best thing you could do tonight is just say, okay, God, whatever you want to do, I'm wide open. There's only one refuge from the judgment of God, and it's in God. And Jonah surrenders to him and is cast out to him. So verse 15, they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered sacrifices to the Lord and made vows. Verse 17, and the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. God sends a storm into Jonah's life as an act of grace to stop Jonah from his self-destructive behavior. And then God sends a fish, not as judgment, but to save Jonah. God doesn't want to drown Jonah. He's not like, you made some mistakes, dunk it, right? That's not what he's doing. God says, I've got to stop the crazy, and that's going to hurt. But I'm going to come in and rescue. We're just in chapter 1. Jonah's not going to drown. God wants to redeem him and to set him on a path that'll change Jonah's lives and others. And that's what he wants to do to you too. So what do? Let me close with this. Some people think the name Jonah is not his real name. Some people think it's a nickname. Because Jonah means dove. And back then that would not be a compliment, right? A dove was kind of a silly little bird that, would beat its head against the glass. Just not the sharpest tool in the shed. And so dove were kind of seen as silly birds that would go anywhere. And so some people think, and Jonah's writing this, he owns it. He's just like, okay, I'm kind of nuts and was flying around everywhere. Some people look at that and go, okay, Jonah's just admitting I'm a little guy that's running around and not making any sense, right? And the interesting thing is the Jewish people in the past, and they still do it now, on the Day of Atonement, that's the day they celebrate God making us right with him. On the Day of Atonement, the Jewish people read the book of Jonah in its entirety. And do you know what they say at the end of it? They all read it, and then they pronounce out loud, I am Jonah. I am Jonah. And what they're doing in that is just acknowledging, I'm a silly little dove that's flown off to places it need not be, and I'm asking God to come get me and bring me home. And my encouragement to you is to do the same tonight. Don't wait till second night, third night, fourth night. But stop here and admit who you are. I've been made by God. I've been made for God. I have run. I am on a boat I should not be on. I have gone to places I was never meant to be. I have touched things and done things and said things that are so far from the man or woman I've meant to be. And I'm not going to promise God how I'm going to fix it. I'm just going to acknowledge, God, you called me to Nineveh, and I'm on my way to Tarshish, and I just want to stop and surrender. I am Jonah. That's what I'm asking you to do tonight. And here's the beauty of it. God's not going to kill Jonah. He's not going to crush you. God is a God of grace. And he steps in to intersect our self-destructive behavior and lead us where we're meant to be. Some of you, you're not religious, but you're running. God has sent a storm of judgment into your life. And if we persist in our rebellion, at the end of your life, there is nothing but judgment. And yet here's the interesting thing. The early church loved the book of Jonah because Jesus quoted it a couple times, a couple different sermons. Jesus said, I'm like Jonah. Not running from God, but Jesus said, I'm going to descend for 3 days, and then I'm going to rise. And I'm going to descend into the judgment of God, not because I sinned, but because you did. And so if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, the story of Jonah finds its fulfillment in Jesus. And I love the way Tim Keller said it. He's talking about the storm of the wrath of God against sin. God hates the horrible things we've done. It's Jesus who threw himself into the storm of God's wrath on our behalf, that we sink into the depths of it with him. But Jesus rose from the dead to forgive our sin, and he can rise and forgive you. You can rise with him. And so if you're in this room and you're like, I'm not a Christian, tonight's your night to get on board with a God who stops our crazy behavior and pulls us back to him by grace. And some of you are Christians, but it's just time to stop running. Some of you, maybe it's just been a little bit of running. You go, you know what? It was just today. I was in a bad mood. I said some crazy stuff. I looked up and I was walking to Joppa. I'm just doing something crazy. Others of you, you've been gone a long time. You say, Ben, I live in Tarshish. I run the Tarshish convenience store. I've been living far from God for way too long, and I'm done. And my hope for you tonight is not that you'd make God big promises, but you'd throw up empty hands and say, with all of us, I'm Jonah. It's my tendency, God, to run from you. But praise be to God, it's your tendency to chase me and come get me.